History is not always written in books. Sometimes it hides in forgotten photographs, faded, scratched, or tucked away in dusty archives. Each of these images is more than just a snapshot. It is a frozen moment that whispers of pain, triumph, or mystery. They carry with them emotions that words alone cannot fully capture. The trembling hands of a soldier waiting for rescue, the determined eyes of a worker building a world at war, the quiet resilience of children growing up in times of chaos. What makes these photographs so powerful is not only the stories they tell, but also the secrets they conceal. Many were never meant to be seen by the public. Some reveal the vulnerability of leaders once thought untouchable. Others show ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, their expressions etched forever on the canvas of time. Looking at them today feels like peeking through a hidden doorway into the past, sometimes inspiring, often heartbreaking, and always unforgettable. In this journey, we will uncover rare and vintage photos that the world was not supposed to remember. Each frame will take us deeper into the fabric of history. Wars that shook nations, inventions that changed everyday life, and human stories that remind us of both cruelty and compassion. So, lean in and prepare yourself, because once you see these hidden moments, you can never unsee them. Vietnam, 1966. A wounded hero still saving others. In the dense jungles near Da Nang, Vietnam, 1966, an American rescuer named Thomas Cole was bleeding from his own wounds. Yet instead of giving in to pain, he knelt beside a fallen comrade, pressing his hands firmly to stop the bleeding, whispering encouragement as helicopter blades thundered in the distance. The air reeked of gunpowder, sweat, and fear. But in that moment, humanity triumphed over war. Cole's sacrifice was immortalized in a single photograph, proof that even in the darkest chaos, courage can burn like a torch. The last helicopter out of Saigon, the 30th of April 1975. The sky over Saigon was heavy with smoke as desperate crowds clung to each other, their eyes fixed on the roof of the US Embassy. It was the 30th of April 1975, the day South Vietnam fell. A helicopter hovered above, its blades slicing the air, the last hope for dozens of civilians scrambling up the ladder. They knew that if they missed this chance, the gates would close forever. The photograph captures more than an evacuation. It captures the moment an entire nation's fate shifted in a single heartbeat. Strange Life Jackets, 1917. Our floating experiment. Long before modern technology made sailing safe, the US Navy tested bizarre prototypes of life jackets in 1917. Imagine sailors at Norfolk Naval Base, wrapping themselves in padded contraptions that looked more like stuffed mattresses than safety gear. They were filled with plant fibers, bulky and awkward, but designed to keep a man afloat in the freezing ocean. The sight was almost comical. Soldiers lined up in heavy, quilt-like armor, trusting their lives to desperate invention. It's a reminder of how survival often demands experimentation, even if it looks absurd in hindsight. The heaviest man alive, 1978. In Seattle, 1978, the world watched in astonishment as John Brower Minogue was wheeled out of his home and into a medical center. At 37 years old, he weighed nearly 1,400 pounds, the heaviest recorded man in history. His body was fragile, his breathing shallow, yet his eyes carried a mix of shame and quiet endurance. Nurses and doctors struggled to move him, requiring a reinforced stretcher just to carry his weight. This haunting image forces us to confront the limits of the human body and the silent suffering that can hide behind a single photograph. Waiting at Hamburger Hill, Etusene Onihundru Onyortates, a lone paratrooper sat in the mud of the A Shao Valley, his rifle resting at his side, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. It was May 1969, the infamous Battle of Dong Ap Bia, better known as Hamburger Hill. The name itself spoke of its brutality, soldiers thrown into relentless waves of gunfire, chewed up by the jungle and spat back out as broken men. In this photo, the soldier waits for evacuation, his silence louder than any battlefield noise. It is not the glory of war we see, but the price it demands from those who fight. Harsh lessons in 1905, Wisconsin. Inside a classroom in Menominee, Wisconsin, 1905, a teacher bends a student across a desk and raises a stick high. Corporal punishment was not only accepted, it was expected. To discipline a child was to shape their character, or so society believed. In the photograph, the other students sit quietly, eyes lowered, perhaps thankful it is not their turn. Today, this picture feels unsettling, but it reveals how drastically ideas of education and discipline have evolved. What once was considered normal now seems unthinkable. Women at the Shell Factory, 1917. In Nottinghamshire, England, 1917, rows of women stand shoulder to shoulder in the National Filling Factory. Their hands are stained yellow from handling TNT powder, their faces weary but determined. During World War I, as men went to the front lines, women stepped into roles once denied to them, producing ammunition, fueling the war machine. They were called munitionettes, and though their work was dangerous and often fatal, they carried on without hesitation. The photograph captures not only industry, but quiet heroism, the women who held society together while the world tore itself apart. Apollo 13, a wounded spacecraft, 1970, floating in lunar orbit, the Apollo 13 service module looked like a carcass ripped open. Its side was torn away, exposing tangled wires and shattered panels. On the 13th of April 1970, an oxygen tank exploded, and suddenly the astronauts' lives hung by a thread. The crew was forced to retreat into the tiny lunar module, using it as a lifeboat. "Houston, we've had a problem," they said calmly, while the world held its breath. This photo is not just about failure, it is about survival, ingenuity, and the fragile line between life and death in the vastness of space. Dogs in gas masks, 1944. A chilling yet surreal photograph shows soldiers in Europe during World War II, their faces hidden behind gas masks. At their side sit trained dogs also wearing masks, snouts covered by strange contraptions. The scene looks almost otherworldly, as if men and animals together had become machines of war. These masks were meant to protect against chemical attacks, a threat that haunted soldiers long after the trenches of World War I. Looking at the dog's steady eyes, one can't help but feel the eerie bond between human and animal, both unwilling participants in mankind's endless conflicts. The birth of the Berlin Wall, 1961. On the 13th of August 1961, workers and soldiers in East Berlin lifted massive concrete slabs into place. Families cried on the other side of the street, knowing that in a single night, loved ones would be separated, perhaps forever. The Berlin Wall, stretching eventually 155 kilometers, did not just divide a city. It cut through hearts, friendships, marriages. The photo captures that exact moment when iron barriers replaced human bonds. For decades, this wall stood as a symbol of the Cold War, cold concrete hiding warm tears. Testing the fighter of the future, 1940. In a German wind tunnel in 1940, engineers carefully studied the Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighter, the pride of the Luftwaffe. Controlled air currents roared through the tunnel, while scientists measured every tilt of the wings and drag across the fuselage. Small adjustments in radiators and angles could mean life or death in the skies. The photograph freezes a moment of science, serving destruction proof that even cutting-edge innovation can be bent toward darker purposes when war demands it. Women in the boxing ring, 1938. In Hollywood, California, two women trade blows inside a makeshift boxing ring built atop a studio building in 1938. Their gloves fly, sweat glistens under the sun, while a small crowd watches in fascination. At a time when female athletes were still dismissed as novelties, these women punched through stereotypes with every swing. This photo speaks not only to the rise of women in sports, but also to the hunger for empowerment, proof that strength was never the property of men alone. The French Angel, 1937. William Stry poses with Maurice Tillet, the French wrestler whose face and body were dramatically transformed by acromegaly, a rare condition that thickened his bones. Audiences in 1937 were both awed and unsettled by his appearance, calling him the French Angel. Yet Maurice carried himself with grace and humor. Decades later, his unusual features would inspire the creation of Shrek. The photograph is haunting, reminding us that beauty and monstrosity are often inventions of perspective, not truth. Building the Matilda tank, 1941. Inside a Ministry of Supply factory in England, 1941, workers strain together to fit the heavy gun turret onto a Matilda tank. Sparks fly, steel groans, and grease stains cover their overalls. Each tank that rolled off the assembly line meant one more machine to face the Axis powers. For the men and women of the factory, this was their battlefield. The photo is silent, But if you look closely, you can almost hear the hammering, the clanging, the heartbeat of industry fueling war. The last photograph of Lenin, 1923. An aging Vladimir Lenin sits slumped in a wheelchair, his hands resting weakly in his lap. The year is 1923, and after multiple strokes, the revolutionary who once shook empires could barely speak. His eyes are distant, locked somewhere between pain and resignation. This is the last known photograph of Lenin before his death. For his followers, the image was sacred. For his enemies, it was a relief. For us today, it is a reminder. Even the most powerful figures cannot escape the frailty of human life. Fashion for the bomb shelters, 1939. In London, 1939, models paraded in outfits that looked both practical and unsettling. Heavy hoods, thick fabrics, and gas masks completed their ensembles, clothing not for beauty, but for survival. These were garments designed for life in air raid shelters, where citizens huddled underground, while German bombers rained destruction above. The photograph captures a strange intersection of style and fear, where fashion tried to soften the terror of war. Nurses in the rubble, 1941. After a German air raid struck London in 1941, the walls of St. Peter's Hospital lay shattered, beams hanging dangerously overhead. Yet, amid the dust and debris, nurses in white uniforms climbed through the ruins. They cleared bricks with bare hands, searching for the injured. The photograph radiates quiet heroism, the resilience of those who fought not with guns, but with compassion. Their courage is a reminder that even when buildings fall, humanity can still stand tall. The first war photographer's darkroom, 1855. Roger Fenton, one of history's earliest war photographers, stands proudly beside a horse-drawn carriage in Crimea, 1855. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary wagon, but inside was something revolutionary, a mobile darkroom. Using wet plates that had to be processed on the spot, Fenton brought the horrors and realities of war to the public for the first time. His photographs did not show blood, but they showed silence, fatigue, and despair. This single carriage carried a new weapon, the truth. Nintendo's humble beginning, 1895. Long before Super Mario and video games, Nintendo's world was paper, ink, and cards. Around 1,895 inches, Kyoto, Japan, artisans sat cross-legged, painting delicate patterns onto handmade Hanafuda playing cards. The company's founder, Fusajiro Yamauchi, built Nintendo's reputation on quality and craftsmanship. Looking at this photo today feels surreal. The same company that once crafted fragile playing cards would one day build digital worlds that defined generations. Children of the oyster plant, 1911. At a seafood plant in Pass Christian, Mississippi, 1911, children no older than 10 sit with piles of oysters, prying them open with small knives. Their fingers are raw, their faces too serious for their age. For them, childhood was not about school or play, but labor, long hours in damp, salty air. The photograph is difficult to look at, it is innocent stolen, a reminder of the struggles hidden beneath the prosperity of the early 20th century. The sword swallower of Weihai, 1922. In 1922, on a crowded street in Weihai, China, a man tilted his head back and slid a gleaming sword down his throat. The crowd gasped, children clutched their parents' sleeves, and the performer stood rigid as steel disappeared into his body. Sword swallowing was more than entertainment, it was a test of control, discipline, and trust in one's own flesh. This rare photograph freezes the tension of that moment, the silence before applause, the breath held in collective awe. The Titanic's killer, 1912. A massive iceberg drifts silently in dark waters, photographed just miles from where the Titanic sank on the 15th of April 1912. Jagged streaks of black mark its side, some say they were scrapes from the doomed ship. This image is eerie because it doesn't just show ice, it shows death. Over 1,500 souls were lost that night, and this photograph may capture the very killer that claimed them. It is as if nature itself left behind its calling card. Training tomorrow's nurses, 1938. At Roosevelt Hospital in New York, 1938, young nursing students stand beside hospital beds, taking notes and practicing techniques. They studied anatomy, ethics, and spent long hours in clinical rotations. In the photograph, their faces are a mix of seriousness and nervous excitement. They knew that within months, real lives would depend on their hands. This picture is a reminder that behind every doctor and nurse we admire today once stood a student, trembling but determined to learn. The end of Prohibition, 1933. The 5th of December 1933, cheers erupted in a Chicago bar as men lifted glasses of beer high above their heads. For 13 years, the US had banned alcohol, forcing it into the shadows, fueling crime and speakeasies. But with the repeal of the 18th Amendment, celebration flowed as freely as the liquor. The photograph sparkles with laughter, relief, and wild joy. It is more than a bar scene, it is the snapshot of a nation reclaiming its right to drink, dance, and forget its troubles for one night. The Chilkoot Pass, Alaska, Yukon, early 1,900 seconds. A black and white image shows a long line of men climbing a steep, snowy slope, each carrying nearly 1,000 pounds of supplies. This was the Chilkoot Pass, the gateway to Yukon during the gold rush. The Canadian government required prospectors to carry enough food and gear to last a year in the Arctic, otherwise they would perish. Step after step, burdened by weight, these men marched toward the dream of gold. The photograph is both inspiring and haunting proof of how far humans will go for hope, and how often nature humbles them instead. Colonel Sanders and the rise of fast food, 1,960 seconds. In a small Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant during the 1,960 seconds, Colonel Harlan Sanders poses proudly beside a smiling customer. White suit, black string tie, and his unmistakable goatee made him an icon. Behind him, red and white buckets of fried chicken lined the counters, a symbol of a new era. This photograph is more than branding. It captures the birth of fast food culture in America. Families who once cooked every meal at home now crowded into diners and drive-thrus. Sanders' fried chicken became not just food, but a piece of Americana. Street vendors of New York, 1,896. The bustling streets of New York in 1896 were filled with voices, wheels clattering, and the smell of fresh produce. Immigrant vendors lined the sidewalks with carts of fruits and vegetables, calling out prices to hurried passers-by. Many of these men and women had arrived with nothing but hope, and selling food was their only chance to survive. This photograph captures not just commerce, but resilience, the way the poor carved out a living in a city that was as harsh as it was full of opportunity. Apollo Command Module Fire Test, 1967. At Cape Canaveral, Florida, engineers examined the charred interior of the Apollo Command Module. During a ground test, a sudden fire had swept through the cabin, killing 3 astronauts in seconds. The photo of the burned interior is grim, wires twisted, panels blackened, hope turned to ash. But out of this tragedy came safety reforms that would make future missions possible. The picture is a reminder that progress in space exploration was written not only in triumphs, but also in sacrifices. Charlie Chaplin and Paulette Goddard, 1936. Backstage on the set of Modern Times in Los Angeles, Charlie Chaplin leans casually with actress Paulette Goddard at his side. The film, a silent masterpiece, portrayed the crushing effects of industrialization on workers. Yet here, the photograph shows a lighter side. Chaplin smiling, Goddard relaxed, 2 artists resting between takes. For a brief moment, the pressures of the world outside economic crisis, political tension vanished. All that remained was laughter, art, and companionship. Women in the boxing gym, 1,890. A rare photograph from a New York City studio in 1890 shows a female boxer practicing her stance, fists raised, eyes sharp with determination. At the time, women's boxing was almost unheard of, hidden in small gyms and experimental athletic clubs. The picture reveals not only a fighter but a pioneer. Each punch she threw was against more than a training bag. It was against a society that told her boxing was not a woman's place. Pole climbing in Boston, 1890. Inside a gymnasium at Charlestown High School, Boston, 1,890, a young female student grips a tall wooden pole, her body tense as she climbs upward. This was part of a Swedish-inspired physical education program designed to improve posture and strength. The photograph looks almost playful, yet it represents a new era when exercise for women was becoming acceptable. Once confined to domestic spaces, young women were now encouraged to develop strong, athletic bodies. The photo feels both innocent and revolutionary, an image of girls literally climbing into the future. A bootlegger's clever trick, 1924. In New York Harbor, 1924, Jenny McGregor was caught smuggling distilled spirits hidden inside life preservers. The Prohibition era had turned alcohol into a forbidden treasure, and smugglers devised ingenious methods to transport it. In the photograph, law enforcement displays the adapted preservers stuffed with bottles instead of cork. It is almost comical, life vests meant to save lives, now saving liquor from the law. But behind the humor lies a darker truth. Prohibition didn't erase drinking, it only made crime more creative. The XP-67 Moonbat, 1944. On an airfield in St. Louis, Missouri, 1944, the experimental McDonnell XP-67 Moonbat rolled into view. Its sleek design looked like something from the future, two massive engines, wings blending smoothly into the fuselage. Built for speed and altitude, the prototype promised to outpace anything in the skies. Yet, despite its futuristic look, the aircraft proved unstable and dangerous. The photograph of its unveiling captures a fleeting dream how innovation often soars with ambition but falls short against reality. Freddie Mercury meets Darth Vader, 1980. In one of rock's most unforgettable moments, Freddie Mercury, dressed in dazzling stage clothes, sat on the shoulders of a man wearing a Darth Vader costume. The year was around 1980, and Queen was at the height of their power. Fans screamed as Mercury laughed, raising a fist triumphantly, riding the villain of Star Wars like a king. The photograph is pure spectacle, part rock and roll rebellion, part playful theater. It reminds us why Mercury remains immortal. He turned every stage into his kingdom. Sean Connery signs a coconut, 1961. On the sunny shores of Jamaica in 1961, during a break from filming Dr. No, Sean Connery leaned over with a smile and signed a coconut for a young fan. This was the moment James Bond was born. The photograph feels almost unreal. Before tuxedos, martinis, and international fame, Connery was just an actor on a beach, humbly engaging with his audience. Within months, he would transform into cinema's most iconic spy. But here, we see the man before the legend. Cousins, divided by thrones, early 1900 seconds. In a rare photograph, Prince George of England and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia stand side by side. Their resemblance is uncanny, same moustaches, same posture, almost like mirror images. Yet behind the smiles lies a tragic irony. Both men were royal cousins, bound by blood, yet destined for vastly different fates. One would live to reign over a modern Britain, the other would be executed in a cellar in Yekaterinburg. This photo feels almost prophetic, a silent warning that history spares no one, not even those born into crowns. James Stewart, the Hollywood pilot, 1944. Best known as the charming actor from It's a Wonderful Life, James Stewart is photographed at an air base in England, 1944, not as an actor, but as a soldier. Wearing his flight gear, he prepared to pilot heavy bombers for the US Army Air Forces. He flew 20 missions over Nazi-occupied Europe, risking his life while others saw him only as a movie star. This photograph blurs the line between Hollywood fantasy and wartime reality, showing Stewart not as a performer, but as a man willing to serve. Veterans among the white headstones, 1951. At Arlington National Cemetery in 1951, a group of World War II veterans stood quietly, gazing at endless rows of white headstones. The photograph is haunting. Young men who survived the battles now walked among the graves of those who didn't. Their uniforms are gone, replaced by simple suits, but the weight in their eyes speaks louder than medals ever could. This moment captures not victory, but remembrance. Junior Racers of Tacoma, 1914. On a wooden oval track nearly 1.8 miles long, a boy and his mechanic posed proudly with their car during Junior Racers Day in Tacoma, Washington, 1914. The car looks fragile, the wheels thin, the engine small. Yet, to them, it was a rocket, a chance to dream of speed and glory. The photo embodies youthful ambition before racing became a dangerous global sport. It was simply boys chasing the thrill of motion. Silent film meets Glamour in Paris, 1959. Buster Keaton, the master of silent comedy, stands beside Zaza Gabor at the Moulin Rouge in Paris, 1959. He looks humble, almost shy, while she glitters with Hollywood charm. The photograph feels like two worlds colliding: old cinema and modern celebrity, black and white melancholy and vibrant glamour. In their smiles, history's transition from silent reels to dazzling color is captured forever. Capturing the Panzerfaust, 1944. In Europe, 1944, a group of Allied soldiers pose proudly with a captured German Panzerfaust, nicknamed the Tank Terror. This shoulder-fired rocket launcher was designed to stop armored vehicles with deadly precision. In the photograph, the soldiers grin as they hold it, their hands running over the weapon that once threatened their very lives. The image is both ironic and powerful, a symbol of how tools of destruction can become trophies of survival. Patients exercising at a Dutch asylum, 1956. At the Street Willebroord Mental Hospital in the Netherlands, 1956, patients line up in the courtyard, arms outstretched, performing synchronized exercises. Their white uniforms make them look almost like soldiers in formation. Doctors of the time believed daily physical routines could improve circulation, discipline, and mental clarity. The photograph feels unsettling, caught between care and control, between treatment and punishment. It is a reminder of how fragile the boundary is between compassion and cruelty in medicine. Behind the scenes of The Godfather, 1972, on a New York film set in 1972, Robert Duvall holds a cue card, while Marlon Brando leans forward, his eyes hidden beneath shadow. Brando, famously reluctant to memorize lines, preferred to improvise. Cue cards were slipped discreetly into scenes so he could speak with spontaneity. This photograph pulls back the curtain on one of cinema's greatest films, showing that even legends sometimes rely on small tricks to create timeless magic. Echoes before radar, 1940 seconds. During World War II, Japanese forces experimented with giant acoustic devices, massive tubular structures designed to detect enemy aircraft by amplifying distant engine sounds. In the photograph, men in uniform stand beside these strange machines, their ears literally pressed to the future. The devices look surreal, like something from a science fiction novel, yet they were real. They remind us of a time when technology was racing forward, but modern radar had not yet changed the rules of war. Building skyscrapers in Chicago, 1965. High above the streets of Chicago, a steelworker balances on a narrow beam, the city skyline rising behind him. It is the mid-1960 seconds, and the city is becoming a forest of steel. With only a simple safety belt, he walks casually, as though the ground were not hundreds of feet below. The photograph freezes the courage and recklessness of those who built America's modern skyline. It is dizzying to look at, and humbling to realize how much of our world rests on their fearless shoulders. The Ball Turret Gunner, 1943. At a U.S. airfield in 1943, a young gunner squeezes himself into the cramped ball turret of a B-17 bomber. Suspended beneath the belly of the aircraft, his body is curled like a child in the womb, except his cradle is glass and steel, armed with twin, 50 caliber machine guns. The photograph captures the claustrophobic terror of his position. Once the bomber took flight, there was no escape. It was both a vantage point of defense and a prison in the sky. Paris's first electric fire truck, 1899. In 1899, the Paris Fire Department unveiled something revolutionary: an electric motor fire truck. Powered by lead-acid batteries, it could carry hoses, water pumps, and equipment at a modest 12 miles per hour. The photograph shows firefighters standing proudly beside it, their faces glowing with confidence in the future. It marked a turning point, the end of horse-drawn engines, and the beginning of mechanized rescue. Though primitive by today's standards, it was a vision of progress at the dawn of a new century. Summer at Coney Island, Etusine or Nihundre of Fieroheltres. The beach is crowded, the sun blazing, and laughter fills the air. Families flocked to Coney Island in 1954, where the Wonder Wheel and the Cyclone roller coaster towered above the shore. The photograph bursts with life: children clutching ice cream, couples strolling hand in hand, soldiers on leave enjoying a brief taste of freedom. In a world still healing from war, Coney Island was a place where people could forget their worries and simply feel alive. The first Boeing 747, 1968, On the 30th of September 1968, at Everett, Washington, the world's first jumbo jet rolled into public view. With 2 decks and room for more than 400 passengers, the Boeing 747 redefined travel. The photograph of the unveiling shows workers staring with pride at the massive machine, while reporters scrambled to capture the moment. This was not just an airplane, it was a new era, one that would shrink the globe and bring distant continents within reach of ordinary travelers. Chicago, the world's rail capital, 1,950. In 1950, steam locomotives thundered through the tangled web of tracks at Chicago's rail hub. The photograph shows rails glistening in the sun, trains lined up nose to nose, smoke filling the sky. At that time, no city on earth handled more trains than Chicago. It was the beating heart of American transportation. Looking at the photo, one can almost hear the whistles, the rumble, the rhythm of a nation in motion. Saving a plane on the USS Lexington, 1,944. In the vast Pacific Ocean, 1,944, sailors aboard the USS Lexington rushed across the carrier's deck. A damaged plane had skidded to a halt, blocking the landing strip. The men, sweating under the tropical sun, grabbed ropes and bare hands to drag the crippled aircraft aside. The photograph captures urgency. Seconds meant life or death, for another plane was circling overhead, low on fuel. Their teamwork was silent but synchronized, a dance of survival on steel waves. Launching the Supermarine Walrus, 1,942. Aboard HMS Pegasus in the icy North Atlantic, a strange sight unfolded. A biplane seaplane, the Supermarine Walrus, was strapped to a catapult. At 68 miles per hour, it shot into the air, splashing sea spray as its wings caught the wind. The photograph feels almost unreal, an aircraft hurled by brute steam power into the sky. These launches prepared crews for reconnaissance missions, searching the endless grey ocean for enemies. It is a snapshot of war's ingenuity, when even the sea itself became a runway. The one-wheel car, 1,932. On the beaches of Weston-super-Mare, England, 1,932, inventor J.A. Purves climbed into a massive steel ring, the Dynasphere. Shaped like a giant wheel, the contraption encased a gasoline engine and manual controls, propelling itself forward at nearly 30 miles per hour. The photograph shows him grinning, but the machine looks precarious, wobbling like a toy. It was daring, ridiculous, and visionary all at once. The image is proof that human imagination sometimes rolls too far ahead of practicality. A boy and his bicycle, London, 1,940 seconds. In post-war London, rubble still littered the streets, but life pushed forward. A boy kneels beside a bicycle, sleeves rolled up, repairing its chain with grease-stained hands. Behind him, shop windows are cracked, buildings scarred by bombs. Yet, in this photograph, hope rides on 2 wheels. It is a portrait of resilience, children learning skills, families rebuilding, a city finding its rhythm again through the simplest acts of survival. Charles rolls beside his dream, 1,904, in Manchester, England, 1904. Charles Stuart Rolls poses proudly next to a gleaming automobile. Just that year, he had partnered with Henry Royce to form Rolls-Royce, a name that would soon become synonymous with luxury. But in this photograph, there is no grandeur, just a young man with a car, unaware that he would also pioneer aviation by becoming the first to fly across the English Channel and back. The photo hums with ambition, a reminder that every empire begins with a single dream. Selling Coca-Cola on the roadside, 1,936. In the heat of a southern US summer, 1,936, a boy stands proudly behind a makeshift stand. Glass bottles of Coca-Cola glisten in the sun, lined up neatly for passing travelers. The photograph feels simple, almost ordinary, but it reveals the growth of a cultural giant. At just 5 cents a bottle, Coca-Cola became not just a drink, but a symbol of modern America. Refreshment, youth, and optimism bottled up for the open road. The Steam Workshop of Sweden, 1,950. In a dimly lit workshop in Västerås, Sweden, 1950, a worker leans into the guts of a steam engine, adjusting bolts with precision. Sparks dance off iron. Smoke hangs heavy in the air. These workshops kept locomotives and power generators alive, fueling trains and sawmills during Europe's recovery after the war. The photograph hums with industry, a world where strength and skill meant survival. Elsie Janis at 17, 1906. On a New York stage in 1906, a teenage girl named Elsie Janis made her Broadway debut in the Vanderbilt Cup. Only 17, she dazzled audiences with her singing, acting, and songwriting. The photograph shows a young star beaming with confidence, her eyes full of promise. She would go on to become a beloved entertainer for American soldiers during World War I, earning the nickname the Sweetheart of the AEF. This picture is more than a debut. It is the spark of a career that touched both stage and battlefield. A Japanese children's tea ceremony, 1890. Inside a traditional home in Japan around 1890, children gather around a small table. Their tiny hands hold miniature teacups, imitating the graceful movements of the chanoyu, the Japanese tea ceremony. The photograph captures not just play, but education, teaching, courtesy, patience, and harmony through ritual. The scene radiates innocence and discipline, reminding us that culture is passed not only through words, but through small, carefully repeated gestures. Guiding drivers by phone. Amsterdam, 1963. In 1963 Amsterdam, before GPS and smartphone maps, drivers picked up a telephone to ask for directions. Operators on the phone navigation line listened carefully, noted the starting point, and gave step-by-step instructions. The photograph shows women in headsets, poised with pens, acting as living GPS units. It's a charming reminder of how ingenuity filled the gaps before technology caught up a world where getting lost meant dialing a stranger for help. Eisenhower the painter, 1954. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the decorated general and US president, pauses over a canvas in 1954. The photograph shows him mid-stroke, painting a portrait of his daughter-in-law Barbara and his grandchildren. Far from the battlefields and politics that defined his life, here he looks peaceful, brush in hand. Over the years, Eisenhower would complete more than 300 paintings, using art as therapy and escape. This rare image softens the iron edges of a military man, revealing the grandfather within. A building floats on the Ohio River, 1916. In an extraordinary scene from 1916, an entire three-story building rests on a barge, floating across the Ohio River. Rather than demolish it, workers chose to move it intact to a new location. The photograph looks surreal: windows, doors, and balconies intact, as though the house itself had decided to sail away. It speaks to the creativity and determination of an era when nothing, not even a river, stood in the way of progress. Moving a house in San Francisco, 1919. 3 years later, in San Francisco, workers pushed an entire house across rollers and rails. Crowds gathered to watch as the structure inched down the street like a slow-moving giant. The photo is both practical and whimsical, proof that even in a city growing rapidly, people found ways to preserve homes rather than destroy them. It is history on wheels, a building with its own journey. Cowboys in the City, Texas, 1953. At the Mayan Dude Ranch in Bandera, Texas, 1953, visitors laughed as they tried out a mechanical barrel suspended by ropes. The contraption mimicked the bucking of a wild bull, tossing wannabe cowboys onto the dust. The photograph sparkles with amusement men in city clothes clinging desperately, children cheering, ranch hands smirking knowingly. It captures the playful spirit of mid-century America, where the frontier lived on not in danger, but in entertainment. 66. Volleyball on stilts. Venice Beach, 1934. On the warm sands of Venice Beach in 1934, laughter rang out as young women leapt and stumbled, balancing on wooden stilts while batting a volleyball back and forth. Their movements were clumsy yet joyful, their long shadows stretching across the shore. The photograph captures the carefree creativity of the interwar years, when even simple games were reinvented for novelty. It's a scene of playfulness in a world that had not yet imagined the coming storm of World War II. 67. Sean Connery meets Brigitte Bardot, 1968. In a sunlit corner of Deauville, France, 1968, Sean Connery and Brigitte Bardot posed together for the first time. She was already Europe's glamour queen. He was the man who had redefined James Bond. Their meeting foreshadowed their collaboration in the Western film Shalako, shot in Spain later that year. The photograph feels electric, two cinematic icons crossing paths, their charisma almost too much for one frame. It is a picture not just of actors, but of legends recognizing each other. 68. Dior's New Look in Paris, 1947. The streets of Paris were still scarred by war when Christian Dior unveiled his bold new look in 1947. In the photograph, a model in a cinched waist dress and wide skirt stands surrounded by a crowd. Some gaze in awe, others in outrage, still rationing food and fabric. Many saw the style as decadent, even offensive. Yet, the design marked the rebirth of haute couture, bringing elegance back to a city starved of beauty. This image embodies the tension between hardship and hope, between austerity and extravagance. 69. Marcel Marceau, Silent Savior, 1948. Around 1948, Parisian streets were graced by a mime in a striped shirt and painted face, Marcel Marceau. In the photograph, he performs as Bip, his famous character, making invisible walls come alive. What the audience didn't know was that during the war, Marceau had risked his life in the French resistance, guiding Jewish children across the border to safety. This rare photo of him performing is not only art, it is testimony. Silence, in his case, was both entertainment and a weapon of resistance. Tisher, John McCain. Before the war, 1965, at the Meridian Naval Air Station in Mississippi, 1965, a young John McCain poses with his squadron beside a sleek A-4 Skyhawk jet. Smiling, confident, and unaware of the trials ahead, he was preparing for missions over Southeast Asia. Just 2 years later, he would be shot down over Hanoi and spend more than 5 years as a prisoner of war. This photograph freezes the last glimpse of innocence before destiny tested him with fire and chains. 71. The Most Beautiful Legs, Paris, 1950. Inside a Paris nightclub in 1950, contestants parade across a small stage, their dresses lifted just enough to reveal long, elegant legs. The competition was called La plus belle jambe du monde, the most beautiful legs in the world. The photograph shows women smiling nervously, judges leaning forward, and a crowd caught between admiration and amusement. It is both glamorous and curious, a glimpse into a post-war society rediscovering pleasure, entertainment, and beauty after years of darkness. 72. Racing for Land, Oklahoma, 1893. The 16th of September 1893, thousands of riders and wagons thundered across the plains in the Cherokee Outlet Land Run. A photograph captures the chaos, dust clouds rising, horses galloping, men and women clinging to wagons piled high with supplies. Within minutes, 8 million acres of land were claimed. The image freezes the frenzy of ambition, the raw hunger for land and opportunity. Yet behind the spectacle lies tragedy, the dispossession of native peoples whose lands were carved away in the name of progress. 73. The Garrick Theater, Chicago, 1891. The photograph of the Garrick Theater in 1891 shows an ornate facade glittering with detail, a masterpiece of architect Louis Sullivan. Inside, its grand interior hosted opera, plays, and cultural events, making it one of Chicago's jewels. Looking at the picture today feels bittersweet. The Garrick was demolished in 1961, its glory reduced to memory. But in this image, it still lives, its arches, carvings, and lights radiating the optimism of a city rising from fire. 74. The crew of the B-29 Waddy Wagon, 1944. In the Mariana Islands, 1944, the crew of a B-29 bomber stand proudly beside their aircraft as they repaint its nose art. Brushes in hand, they carefully touch up the cartoon figure that gave their plane personality. For these young men, painting wasn't just decoration, it was survival. Nose art gave their machines an identity, a lucky charm against the terror of long Pacific missions. The photograph feels almost tender, showing soldiers bonding with their flying fortress. 75. Göring's hunt in Poland, 1938. On the 26th of February 1938, Hermann Göring, one of Nazi Germany's most powerful men, was photographed hunting alongside Polish President Ignacy Mościcki. Dressed in heavy coats, rifles slung over shoulders, they smiled for the camera as if politics were far away. Yet the photo is chilling in hindsight. Just a year later, Germany would invade Poland, shattering any pretense of friendship. The picture is a mask, concealing the storm already gathering on Europe's horizon. 76. Queen Elizabeth II's coronation portrait, 1953. In June 1953, a young Queen Elizabeth II stood in Buckingham Palace, draped in coronation robes heavy with history. On her head rested the glittering imperial state crown. In her hands, the golden scepter and orb symbols of monarchy passed down for centuries. The photograph captures not only her elegance, but also the weight of responsibility pressing upon a 27-year-old woman suddenly tasked with guiding a nation. Behind the jewels and grandeur, you can almost sense her resolve, and perhaps her quiet fear, as she stepped into a role that would define her life. 77. Measuring bathing suits, Atlantic City, 1,920 seconds. A photograph from the beaches of Atlantic City in the 1,920 seconds shows a female police officer kneeling with a ruler, measuring the length of a woman's bathing suit. Modesty laws at the time dictated exact minimum lengths for swimsuits, and women could be fined or even arrested for bearing too much skin. The scene feels absurd today, an officer with a tape measure, tourists watching curiously, but it reminds us how fashion and freedom have always been policed. What we now take for granted was once a battle measured in inches. 78. New York schoolchildren, 1886. In a crowded New York classroom in 1886, rows of children sit stiffly at wooden desks. Their faces are serious, their clothes worn, and their eyes tired. Just 12 years earlier, compulsory education had been mandated, forcing children of immigrants and working families into classrooms. The photograph reveals both progress and struggle. Education became a right, but overcrowded schools and long hours weighed heavily on young shoulders. It is a portrait of a generation caught between poverty and opportunity. 79. The invention of the seat belt, 1959. In a simple studio photograph from 1959, Volvo engineer Nils Bohlin demonstrates his new creation, the three-point seatbelt. The design, a Y-shaped strap across the chest and waist, looked modest, yet it would save millions of lives. At first, the public dismissed it as unnecessary, even restrictive, but Bohlin insisted, and history proved him right. This photo is not flashy, but it may be one of the most important images of the 20th century. A quiet revolution in safety. 80. A Soviet mother of four twins, 1956. In a rural Soviet town in 1956, a mother poses proudly with her children, four sets of twins. 8 young faces look curiously into the camera, identical pairs lined neatly on each side of her. The Soviet Union celebrated such families as symbols of national vitality, granting them state support and attention. The photograph is both intimate and political, showing not just a mother's pride but also a regime's use of family as propaganda. Still, beyond ideology, it radiates warmth. A woman surrounded by the lives she brought into the world. 81. A ship's mascot, 1941. On the deck of a Royal Navy vessel in 1941, a small cat perches proudly with the crew. Its fur is slightly ruffled by the sea wind, while sailors grin at the camera. During World War II, pets on board were more than companions. They were rat catchers, morale boosters, and tiny reminders of home in a world consumed by chaos. This photograph is tender, almost defiant. Amid war's machinery and death, sailors still found comfort in the purr of a ship's cat. Bashar. The Roundhouse in London, 1847. The photograph of London's Roundhouse, taken in 1847, shows a vast circular structure nearly 164 feet in diameter. Built as a locomotive shelter and turntable for the London and North Western Railway, it was a marvel of Victorian engineering. The great iron chains and arches supported the busy movement of trains in and out of the city. Today it is known as a cultural venue, but in this image, it still belongs to the age of steam, when industry itself was architecture. 83. A chimpanzee nurses a leopard cub, 1971. At South Park Zoo in the United Kingdom, 1971, a chimpanzee gently cradles a tiny leopard cub, holding a bottle to its mouth. The cub's mother had rejected it, but the chimp adopted the role with uncanny tenderness. The photograph is both heartwarming and astonishing, blurring the lines between instinct and compassion. In an age when zoos were still symbols of human dominance over nature, this image shows the opposite, that animals too are capable of extraordinary empathy. 84. The Art Deco hairdryer, 1,930 seconds. At a beauty fair in the 1,930 seconds, a woman sits beneath a towering Art Deco hairdryer, its sleek chrome shell arching over her head like a futuristic helmet. The photograph sparkles with modernity, the marriage of style and technology. It speaks of an era obsessed with progress, when even grooming became a stage for innovation. Looking at it today, the machine seems absurdly bulky, yet it represented sophistication and hope for a glamorous future. 85. A locomotive bursts through the roundhouse wall, 1,905. In Hartford, Connecticut, the 8th of July 1905, disaster struck. Locomotive number 321 rolled off a turntable, smashed through the brick wall of a roundhouse, and came to rest outside the building. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured. The photograph shows the train's nose jutting from the rubble like a beast breaking free from its cage. It is a dramatic reminder of the raw power of machines and how thin the line is between control and catastrophe. 86. Taco Bell's first menu, 1960 segundo, a simple photograph from California in the 1,960 seconds, shows a modest Taco Bell stand. Its sign hand-painted, its menu shockingly cheap. Tacos for 19 cents, burritos, tostadas, enchiladas, even chili burgers. There were no neon lights, no sprawling drive-thrus, just a small counter and a dream. This picture is more than nostalgia. It is the birth of a food empire that would redefine fast, affordable dining for millions. Looking at it now, it feels almost unbelievable that something so humble grew into a global icon. 87. A sewing machine in Kuwait. 1955. On the streets of Kuwait City in 1955, a woman balances a heavy sewing machine in her arms. The photograph shows her determination, her face half hidden by the burden she carries. At the time, sewing was not only a domestic task but also a livelihood, a way for families to survive and preserve cultural traditions. The sewing machine itself symbolized both independence and necessity, an object that could clothe, feed, and support a household. 88. Cairo street scene, 1964. In downtown Cairo, 1964, the streets burst with energy. Vintage cars honked through crowded lanes, while pedestrians wove between vendors, shouting prices for fruit, bread, and cloth. The photograph captures the heartbeat of a city straddling tradition and modernity, ancient markets colliding with 20th century automobiles. The air seems alive with motion, voices, and color. This is not a posed image, but life caught mid-stride, a frozen moment of Egypt's unstoppable dynamism. 89. Public supermarket founder, 1963. George Jenkins, the founder of Public Supermarkets, stands inside one of his stores in Lakeland, Florida, 1963. Shelves are neatly stocked, aisles gleam, and Jenkins smiles proudly at his creation. He had opened his first market in 1930, introducing innovations like air conditioning and automatic doors, luxuries at the time. This photograph embodies not just a store, but a revolution in shopping. Customer service, cleanliness, and convenience became the pillars of a new retail experience. 90. London's pneumatic tube mail, 1,860 seconds, a grainy black and white photo from the mid-negative 1,860 seconds, shows engineers inspecting a strange underground system in London. Small wagons, propelled by blasts of air, zip through pipes beneath the city, carrying letters at nearly 2.5 miles per minute. The photograph feels almost steampunk, a Victorian dream of instant communication. Though the system would eventually be abandoned, it symbolized the relentless human drive to connect faster, farther, and with less effort, an ancestor of the networks we take for granted today. 91. The Kennedy children, 1,928. In the backyard of their Hyannisport summer home, 1,928, the Kennedy children gathered for a family portrait. 8 young faces: Jean, Robert, Patricia, Eunice, Kathleen, Rosemary, John, Jack, and Joseph Jr. stood in a neat row. Their clothes were simple, their expressions a mix of playfulness and discipline. The photograph radiates the innocence of youth, yet history would transform them into one of America's most famous and tragic families. Looking back, it feels like a snapshot of destiny before it unfolded. 92. Candle clocks of old London. 1,800 seconds. A curious invention appears in a London home around 1800, a candle with a metal nail embedded in its wax. As the flame melted downward, the nail eventually dropped into a tray below, clattering loudly to wake the sleeper. The photograph of this odd alarm clock reveals the cleverness of an age before electricity. It is simple, practical, and a little dangerous proof that human ingenuity has always burned brightest in the dark. History is more than dates, battles, and names in textbooks. It is human lives captured in fragile fragments of time. Each photograph we have explored today is a doorway into another world. A soldier's sacrifice in Vietnam, a mother's pride in Soviet Russia, a child's labor in the oyster plants of Mississippi, or a queen's uneasy smile beneath the weight of a crown. These images are not staged. They are raw, imperfect, and hauntingly real. They show us courage and cruelty, laughter and despair, invention and destruction. And perhaps that is why they stay with us, because in their silence, they speak louder than any speech. They remind us that history is not distant, it is personal, lived moment by moment, face by face. As you reflect on these rare photographs, ask yourself, which image struck you the most? Which story stayed in your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you see in these windows to the past. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you want to continue uncovering the hidden corners of history, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. Until next time, remember, the past is never truly gone. It waits for us in the shadows of forgotten photographs.